Okay, so I finally feel prepared enough to come on here and talk about the book Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which changed my life. Like, okay, so the reason that I took so long, or my excuse for taking so long, is because I think this is a really important book. This was really one of the fundamental books that it changed changed my life, but two, also it sets the foundation for a way of thinking. It's my belief that the more you know, the more you can change your behavior to be the way you would like it to be. So I think the whole book is important. I encourage everyone to read the whole of this book, but I wanted to focus on the chapter that is actually called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Just to give you a background, Joy Degruy is a PhD. She talks to all of the Ivy League schools, and she used to be a social worker. So, and obviously she's a researcher, which is how she wrote this book. This book, she said, took her 8 years to write. So just some things to think about her, and let's jump right in. So, the chapter Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, it begins with a description of what it is. So you guys might be familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder, and if you're not, I have the definition for you. It's basically, it's what causes, it's basically the result of a traumatic experience, a threat to someone's life, their physical integrity, or the life or physical integrity of a spouse, a kid, or a person that they see, a close relative, etc. It can also come from the sudden destruction of your home or your community, seeing violence enacted on another person, or an experience that involves intense fear or terror, or helplessness. Now, helplessness, I feel like is a big one. So this book is about Black people, right? And I feel like one of the things that goes on that a lot of people don't think about is police brutality and how it affects us on an ongoing basis. Because at least for me, when I see police brutality, when I see a Black person being harmed, attacked, physically assaulted by the police, I personally feel hurt because of that. And I know that it could happen to anyone at any given time. It could happen to one of my family members. And often one of the things that I do feel is helplessness, because what can I do? You know what I mean? A lot of the times police get off or what have you. So anyway, I'm going to move away from that and then move on to the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is intense psychological distress at the sign of any internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble that traumatic effect. So, like, if you witness someone get pushed down the stairs, the next time you see a staircase, you might get these psychological, and it can even be physical, experience to what's going on, right? So it also is diminished interest in activities, feeling detached, a sense of foresighted future, right? So that's another big one, because we talk about delayed gratification. What do you feel when you set out for a goal? A lot of the times we want goals to be immediate, but the bigger your goal is, the longer it might take to actually achieve. So when we think about how this applies to Black people, or to people in general, I should say, I'll give the example of medical school. Why don't people want to go to medical school? Oh, it's going to take 8 years. I don't have all that time to be sitting in school or to be sitting in college. Well, the time is going to pass anyway, but you're not seeing that far into the future. You're only seeing right now, I don't want to be in school. Okay, so then the next few symptoms are difficulty of falling or staying asleep, irritability or outbursts of anger, like screaming, or difficulty concentrating, right? We talk about ADHD. Okay, so then we have the legacy of that trauma, right? After this negative experience, not only do we have these symptoms when we're exposed to triggers, but it's also plays out in our behaviors and our beliefs. Okay, so then the next question is, how does post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic slave syndrome get passed down? So the answer to that is pretty simple, right? How do we raise our children? We raise our children based on how we were raised and how our parents were raised, right? So the same ideas and the same beliefs are passed down through child rearing. Okay, so if we as Black people raise our children, who were our parents at that time, or who were our ancestors, if they were slaves at that time, we picked up a lot of the tools that slaves used, such as aggression, violence, beating our kids, screaming at our kids, etc. That's how you get a slave to do what you want them to do, right? But if we think about a child, is a child supposed to be a slave? And I'm not here to advocate to be or to not be, but I'm just asking you to think about some of the things that may have been passed down throughout slavery and how that affects how we raise our children, right? Okay, so I'll move right into post-traumatic slave syndrome, because we talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. So post-traumatic slave syndrome, Joy Degruy is saying, is multi-generational trauma. So this is trauma that's been passed down on and on, starting with slavery. Aggression and violence has as a way of raising children or raising slaves, and then once we were freed, passing down this idea of how to raise children based on aggression and violence, right? And then that linked with continued oppression, so the way we're treated, racism, etc. The absence of opportunity. So, anyway, I'm going to go way too far off if I start talking about that. And then access to benefits. So you can think about things like bank loans, even credit score, I find is to be a discriminatory practice, because poorer people can't necessarily or don't necessarily have the tools to pay bills on time, which is one of the biggest indicators of a credit score, right? Okay, so post-traumatic slave syndrome, she sums up into these 4 things. So 1 is the power of belief. 2 is vacant esteem. So this is a little bit different than low self-esteem, but I'll talk about that after. Then she has ever-present anger. So this feeling of like constantly being angry and upset. And 4 is racist socialization, right? So first she talks about the power of belief. So basically beliefs color everything that we do. It determines what we perceive and how we evaluate, and it determines what we consider likely or possible. It shapes our memories, and it also shapes our expectations and strongly influences what we think, how we think, and what we feel. So to give an example, like let's say I believe that all men are bad, right? Now I might meet a nice guy, let's say, and then he does something bad, and I go and I say, see, all men are bad, all men, etc. Okay, so one thing that I want to mention is how what we see shapes the way that we believe. So a lot of times, if you look at research, it'll tell you that new generations tend to mimic what their parents did. So if parents went to college, then you might believe that you also will be able to attend and graduate college. So basically, we look at everything through the lens of what we believe. So when certain things happen, whether it be good or bad, we look at it and we reaffirm our beliefs. So, okay, next she talks about this idea of vacant esteem that's missing. So she describes esteem not on a scale of like low or high self-esteem, which is how it's usually described, but instead she talks about like healthy esteem, right? So esteem has to do with your worth and value, what you feel you contribute to society or to friends or to family or community. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a monetary thing, although it might be. It might also be that you're a good listener, or that you know how to bake well, or etc. Right? Confidence is something else, because you can have confidence and have or have unhealthy esteem, I should say. Confidence is more about how effective we feel we are. So I might want to try baking. If I'm confident in my baking skills, then I might want to try baking. But that's different from the esteem the worth or value that my baking actually contributes to my community or my friends or my family, right? So healthy esteem, she describes how healthy esteem is formed, and it basically comes from accurate and honest assessment of your worth, right? So being able to ask yourself, what do I contribute to the community, or what do I contribute to my friends, to society, to my family, etc. And if you can come up with things, then chances are you have a healthy esteem. But this is an ongoing thing, and there's different aspects to having a healthy esteem, right? So vacant esteem is the idea that you have no worth or very little worth, right? So I noted this page, so I think there's something important on this page. Okay, so I'm just going to read the excerpt because I think it's really important when we're talking about esteem, right? So measuring your worth, she says, is a tricky business, yet we can all identify it when we see it, right? How much do you contribute to others' success? So do you help people? Do you encourage people? How much do you contribute to the work necessary to grow yourself so that you can make even greater contributions to your community? So that I thought is interesting, because she's basically saying, how much self-work do you do? Do you try to better yourself? For instance, my mom is an ultrasound technician. Does she go to professional development or workshops or whatever to better her her ultrasound skills? Does she spend time thinking about this? Okay. So then we have how much are you willing to sacrifice for the greater good, right? So are you a selfish person? Are you willing to let go of some of the things that you need for yourself in order to contribute to a greater need, right? How willing are you to accept responsibility for your mistakes as well as your successes, right? So when you make a mistake, are you able to honestly say to yourself, you know what, I've made a mistake, I need to apologize, and leave it at that, rather than actually making excuses for your behavior or ignoring it or what have you, right? So this all has to do with healthy esteem or healthy worth, a sense of worth, right? How determined are you to persist when things get hard? So this is a big one, because a lot of people, again, this goes hand in hand with delayed gratification, right? They say a business takes 5 years to take off. Well, a lot of people want to be entrepreneurs, right? But are they willing to wait that 5 years and persist? And when roadblocks come up, are they willing to find a way around the roadblocks? For instance, a lot of people, think that college is like an easy thing. You go in, you do your classes, etc. But there's plenty of roadblocks to actually getting a degree, right? So are you willing to maybe take a break? Are you willing to go back to college? Or are you willing to do things that will help you get to whatever end goal it is? I'm just using the examples that I'm most familiar with. But this could be anything. If you're a hairstylist and you wanted to open your own hairstyling business, are you willing to, when you reach a hurdle, when you are having a difficult time, are you willing to do the things to make it, to continue to move forward towards your goal, right? Okay. How willing are you to let the best person for the job lead and happily support that leader, right? So everyone wants to be the boss. How willing are you, when you know that someone is better at whatever particular talent that they have, how often are you willing to support that person and be happy for that person, right? How do you delight in others' success, right? So, no brainer. If someone's doing well, do you congratulate them? If someone is, whatever it is, are you happy for other people? Like, you have to really ask yourself, if you're trying to figure out, okay, what is my worth and do I have a healthy esteem of myself? You have to ask yourself, when others are doing well, do I honestly feel happy for them? Do I congratulate them? Do I, acknowledge them? Hey, I think you're doing a really great job at X, right? Okay. And then, to what degree is the world a better place for your existence? So this is really an internal question that you should probably ask yourself on a regular basis, because a lot of times when people do feel worthless, it's because they don't feel that they have anything to offer to the world. Okay. The other part that I wanted to talk about was how our lack of esteem passes down to our children, right? So the idea here is that if we don't take time to reflect on how we rear our children, so this goes back to assessing, am I doing a good job? In order for you to actually acknowledge your mistakes, you have to think about what the things that you're doing are, right? So do you take time out to reflect and also to research? This is a big one. This is not what she says in the book, but for myself, I know a big part of my parenting is researching what are the ways that you can be a more effective parent, right? So I put out another example. I put up another page number. So she said, some of the extreme ways that we've worked to make our children submissive and docile provides examples of established parenting practices that contribute to vacant esteem. So if you expect your children to basically listen to you all the time, do everything correct, traditionally, I think a lot of us think of that as a good thing, but you have to really ask yourself, what are you training them to be, right? Are you training them to be a leader? Because a leader is creative. A leader wants to try new things. A leader wants to create new things, and other people will follow. Or are you teaching them to be completely passive and take directions, right? So a worker takes directions. A worker is not a leader. So you have to ask yourself, like, do you want your child to be a follower and be, a worker that takes directions? If so, then go ahead, beat the shit out of your kids, whatever. But if you want them to be a leader, then you have to ask yourself, am I willing to allow them to be who they are and express themselves, even if that means that at some points we may not have full control over our children, right? Okay, so the next thing that she talks about is ever-present anger, right? So how often do you hear people fighting literally over anything? It might be you're in the parking lot. Someone takes your parking spot. People are ready to fight and kill and whatever just over something so simple as a parking spot. There's no actual danger. No one's actually put you in a situation where you need to become violent or you need to become angry, but for some reason you feel so enraged that you're like ready to like choke the person who took your parking spot or what have you. I know this is something that I've experienced in my life, and I've changed from that, but I know that a lot of people, I know that it's something that is a real thing, that we might become angry over whatever, over anything, right? So she's saying that some of these things are what have been passed down. So one of the things that she says is that anger is also sometimes a response to frustration of a blocked goal. So whatever your goal is, if you are constantly reaching toward it and you feel that everyone is sort of pushing back against it, you may feel an ongoing frustration, like, whether it's a raise at your job or a promotion at your job, whether it's trying to get a loan for a car or trying to get a loan for a house and you can't get it. So these are some of the reasons that we harbor this anger, and we feel this need to constantly outburst or what have you if we're not reaching the goals that we set for ourselves, right? Okay. And then she talks about typically when the true target of a person, she says typically when the true target of a person's feelings is deemed to be out of reach, the person will take their feelings out on safer targets, right? So you all know the phrase, come home and kick the dog. Well, a lot of people also come home and kick their child, literally and figuratively. I couldn't remember the word. Literally and figuratively, whether they're abusing their children verbally, whether they're abusing their children physically. A lot of times things that happen outside affect the way that we view our children. And this is something I have to check myself on as well a lot of the times, because if I'm angry about something, the things that the kids do that normally don't affect me will affect me more, right? So kids don't listen a lot of the time, you know, and most of the time I try to be patient. I try to, you know, be understanding towards my children. But if there's something going on in my life outside of the children, it's a little harder for me to see that they're only being children. Rather, I'm looking at them like they're bad children, and I want to, you know, take out my anger. The last one is racist socialization. So Joy Degruy gives the example of a little boy who basically she was teaching a class, and and a little boy raises his hand, and he said that his mama said, don't bring home no dark-skinned woman, right? So, and basically the boy tried to make, Joy is a light-skinned woman, I'll show you her picture. The boy tried to make her feel better by saying, well, you know, not your complexion, darker than you. But that didn't make her feel any better, right? So racist socialization. So this is basically the ideas that have been presented to us throughout our lives. And it's basically that white is right and black is bad, right? So first of all, we can talk about the media, right? A lot of the times we see that in the media tends to favor light-skinned people, people with curlier textured hair, and people who have more European versus more African American features. So even the example of, I always give this example, when Beyonce first had her child, Blue Ivy, right? People presented all these pictures of Blue Ivy saying, you know, her hair is nappy, why doesn't she comb her hair, etc., etc. But Kanye West's daughter, who's half white or half whatever, you know, no one ever spoke the same ill of her, right? But the fact of the matter is, Blue Ivy's hair is nappy. She's a child. When you see a white child, their hair is never done per se, right? Their hair is out, and no one has a problem with that because their hair is accepted, societally accepted, right? Versus people, you know, always want their hair to be less nappy, more curly, and generally don't appreciate the beauty in blackness, right? So that's just an example of how racist socialization affects us. And we internalize those things. So because we don't see, also, okay, so another example, also we don't, we tend to associate positive things with whiteness, and we tend to associate negative things with blackness, right? So a lot of times when we think of movies, they will show the kind character as light-skinned, you know, curlier hair, etc., and the more evil character as a darker woman with, you know, I'm just gonna reach here and say with nappier hair, but that's, you know, that's something different. Perfect example, the movie Norbit. This is a throwback, but Rasputia, I'll upload a picture. Rasputia, I'll upload a picture. Rasputia was a big dark-skinned black woman, and then the woman that came and rescued Norbit was a skinny light-skinned woman, right? So we may think that we don't internalize things, but when we look at the way that we treat certain people, like for instance Beyonce's daughter Blue Ivy, and saying that she's, you know, not beautiful, it shows a direct reflection of this racist socialization, right? So the last thing I just want to share is her direct words, because I think she does a better job of explaining it than I am doing, right? So she says, okay, one is a line that I think is important. She said, it's not uncommon for people being held captive to take on the views and attitudes of their captors, right? This is something you can research. This is like a real thing, that people who are kidnapped tend to try to emulate their kidnappers or end up loving their kidnappers or what have you. And I think it's a coping mechanism, but you can research more on that. Then she says, Many of us look at ourselves and our community through white eyes. We mold ourselves to accommodate white prejudices and endeavor to adopt their standards, right? So again, the weave industry is one of the biggest industries, right? Why? Because you can adopt hair that is more similar to Europeans, even if it's not white hair. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with wearing weave. I'm just pointing out that it may be us trying to accommodate the prejudices that we've experienced, right? Or internalizing the prejudices that we experience, right? So it says, many African Americans have adopted white standards, including those of beauty and material successes, as well as violence and brutality. Some African Americans project an image of inferiority through their behavior, thus confirming the views of white racists who believe themselves superior, right? Many of our youth glamorize thug life and lack of education, when the primary avenues of aspirations are athletics and entertainment. And when males and females, young and old, are sexually irresponsible, we make very real the prejudices of white America and give life to their caricatures of African Americans. Okay, so how did this idea of good hair and bad hair come about? Well, basically, when slave owners raped black women, the offspring would work and sometimes live in their houses, right? So these slaves, obviously, if they're half white, were lighter skinned and had straighter hair, whiter hair, right? These features are basically associated with an improved quality of life, of living in a house versus being a slave outdoors, right? So during slavery, thick and wavy hair was referred to as good hair, and kinky hair, nappy hair, was referred to being bad hair. So this is something that has continued today to be in our vocabulary, that we feel that the good hair is Northwest and the bad hair is Blue Ivy, right? So these are the 4 things that she talks about. It's vacant esteem, ever-present anger, and racist socialization. And she's saying that these things basically infiltrate our entire lives here. So why did I choose to go through this? Well, because I believe that once you know, you can actually make a decision to change the way you think and the way that you view the world, right? So I hope this video was good. I hope you guys enjoyed. Feel free to like, comment. If you disagree with things I said, share your opinion so we can talk about it. And that's it.